It was a bright summer morning at Nashville International Airport, with the sun casting long shadows across the pristine tarmac. The private aviation terminal stood quiet and exclusive, its glass doors gleaming in the early light. Through these doors walked the Robinson family, looking fresh and relaxed as they wheeled their matching set of bronze-colored designer luggage. At the head of the group was Mr. Robinson, one of the country's top neurosurgeons, wearing dark jeans and a casual blue button-down that did nothing to hint at his impressive career saving lives in the operating room. His wife, a powerhouse corporate attorney who just won a major case last week, walked beside him in a flowing summer dress, her natural hair styled elegantly. Their teenage daughter had inherited her mother's grace and her father's sharp wit. She was already taller than her mom at 14, dressed in trendy high-waisted jeans and a vintage band t-shirt, completely absorbed in texting her friends about their upcoming vacation. Her younger brother, 12 years old and full of endless energy, bounced along beside them, his new sneakers lighting up with each step as he rattled off facts about the Bahamas. Did you know the Bahamas has the clearest water in the world? You can see up to 200 feet below the surface, he exclaimed, barely containing his excitement. His father smiled, reaching over to ruffle his son's hair. Maybe we'll spot some sea turtles while snorkeling, he replied, making the boy's eyes light up even brighter than his shoes. Mrs. Robinson checked their flight details on her phone one last time, though she knew everything was in order. The family had done this trip dozens of times before. Their private jet was practically a second home in the sky. The children had grown up taking these flights, but they never lost their sense of wonder about flying. As they made their way through the private terminal, the staff greeted them with genuine warmth. The family had always treated everyone at the airport with kindness, from the janitors to the pilots, and that kindness was always returned. The security guard at the desk gave them a friendly wave, having just seen them last month when they flew out for a medical conference where Mr. Robinson was the keynote speaker. The pristine terminal was relatively empty, as it usually was on Tuesday mornings. Their footsteps echoed softly on the polished floor as they walked past the exclusive waiting area with its leather chairs and complimentary coffee bar. The kids had already spotted their sleek jet through the floor-to-ceiling windows, its freshly waxed exterior gleaming in the morning sun. "I call the back seats," their son shouted, already planning which movies he'd watch during the 3-hour flight. His sister rolled her eyes good-naturedly, more interested in finishing her summer reading assignment in her favorite seat by the window. Their parents shared a knowing look. Some things never changed, no matter how many flights they took. Little did they know that their routine family trip was about to become anything but ordinary. As they walked toward the private jet access door, none of them noticed the woman watching them with narrowed eyes from across the terminal, her face twisted in a look of suspicion and disbelief. The peaceful morning was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would soon have millions of people across the country talking about what happened next at Gate B7 of the private aviation terminal. The family continued their way down the terminal, the wheels of their luggage rolling smoothly across the floor, their voices mixing with quiet laughter as they discussed their plans for the beach. The next few minutes would test their patience, dignity, and strength as a family, but for now, they were simply happy to be starting their vacation together. The tranquil morning at the private aviation terminal was about to be shattered by what happened next. A woman in her mid-50s, wearing an expensive beige pantsuit and clutching a designer handbag, had been watching the Robinson family since they walked in. Her perfectly styled blonde hair and manicured nails screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," but it was the look in her eyes that spelled trouble. She'd been sitting in the exclusive waiting area, sipping her third cup of complimentary coffee while waiting for her husband's business partner to arrive. When she spotted the Robinson family walking confidently through the terminal, something inside her just couldn't compute. Her narrow worldview was being challenged, and like many people who fear what they don't understand, she decided to take action. At first, she just watched them, her coffee forgotten as she observed the family's easy manner and expensive luggage. The more relaxed and entitled to be there they appeared, the more agitated she became. She started muttering under her breath, catching the attention of nearby travelers who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Something's not right here," she whispered to an elderly gentleman seated next to her, who promptly got up and moved to another chair, wanting no part in what was clearly about to unfold. But she didn't notice his reaction, too focused on what she believed was her civic duty to maintain order in the private terminal. The woman stood up, smoothed her pantsuit, and began following the family at what she thought was a discreet distance. Of course, everyone in the terminal could see exactly what she was doing. A few people even started recording on their phones, sensing that something newsworthy was about to happen. With each step, her confidence grew. She convinced herself more and more that she was right. These people must be lost, or worse, up to something suspicious. The fact that they were well-dressed, well-spoken, and obviously comfortable in the private terminal didn't fit her preconceptions, and that made her even more determined to intervene. The youngest Robinson child was the first to notice her. He tugged on his mom's sleeve and whispered that someone was following them. His sister looked back and rolled her eyes, unfortunately all too familiar with what that particular expression on someone's face usually meant. Their parents hadn't noticed yet, still discussing their plans for the week ahead. The woman picked up her pace, her heels clicking loudly on the polished floor. She was now close enough that other passengers could hear her mumbling about checking credentials and keeping things exclusive. A young businessman watching the scene unfold shook his head in disappointment, while two flight attendants at the coffee station exchanged knowing looks. Just as the Robinson family approached the private jet access door, the woman decided it was time to make her move. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and increased her stride, practically power walking toward them. The terminal had grown eerily quiet, as everyone within viewing distance seemed to hold their breath, watching the impending confrontation. The family was just about to show their credentials to the smiling attendant at the door when they heard it, that sharp, commanding voice that unfortunately they'd heard too many times before in various situations. "Excuse me," the woman called out, her tone suggesting she was preparing for battle rather than a simple conversation. The Robinson parents shared a quick glance, years of dealing with similar situations passing between them in that single look. Their daughter subtly pulled out her phone, while their son moved closer to his mom. The airport staff, who knew the family well, were already moving toward them, but they wouldn't get there before the woman made her presence known. As the woman closed the final few steps between them, the air in the terminal grew thick with tension. Other travelers stood frozen, phones recording, as they were about to witness an unfortunately common scene play out in an uncommon setting. The next few moments would turn this quiet Tuesday morning into a viral sensation that would have people talking for weeks to come. What happened next would soon be shared millions of times across social media. The woman in the beige pantsuit planted herself directly in front of the Robinson family, blocking their path to the private jet access door. Her face was flushed with what she probably thought was authority, but to everyone watching, it just looked like plain old prejudice. "This area is for private jet owners only," she announced loudly, emphasizing each word as if speaking to children. "I think you must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. The main terminal is that way." She pointed toward the exit with a perfectly manicured finger, her expensive rings catching the morning light. The Robinson children, sadly familiar with these situations, moved closer to their parents. Their father, the renowned neurosurgeon, took a deep breath. After performing countless delicate brain surgeries, he knew how to stay calm under pressure. Their mother, who had faced down tough opponents in courtrooms across the country, simply raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am," Mr. Robinson began politely, his voice steady and clear, "we're exactly where we need to be. Now, if you'll excuse us." But the woman wasn't having it. She cut him off mid-sentence, her voice getting louder with each word. "I've been flying private for 15 years, she declared, puffing up with self-importance. "I know everyone who belongs here, and you people clearly don't." Several gasps echoed through the terminal at her choice of words. The young businessman who had been watching earlier shook his head in disgust and started recording on his phone. Mrs. Robinson stepped forward, her professional instincts kicking in. "First of all," she said calmly, "you have no authority to question anyone's presence here. Second, you're making some very inappropriate assumptions." Her daughter was already recording the interaction, her hand steady as she captured every moment. But the woman doubled down. "I'm just trying to maintain the standards of this establishment," she insisted, her voice hitting a pitch that made nearby windows practically vibrate. "I demand to see your boarding passes right now." She actually held out her hand, as if she had any right to inspect their documents. The son, despite his youth, couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. "Mom," he said, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "isn't that our jet right there? The one with our company logo on it." He pointed through the window at their sleek private aircraft, clearly visible on the tarmac. The woman spun around to look where he was pointing, then spun back, her face getting redder by the second. That's impossible," she sputtered. "You're lying. You must have stolen someone's passes. Security," she yelled, though the actual security staff were already approaching, just not for the reason she thought. By now, a small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance, all recording what was quickly becoming a viral moment in the making. The Robinson family maintained their composure, standing tall and dignified in the face of such blatant prejudice. "I'm calling the police," the woman announced, fumbling with her phone. "This is clearly a security breach. These people cannot possibly own a private jet." Her hands were shaking so much she could barely dial, her designer bag swinging wildly from her arm. Mr. Robinson looked at his watch and sighed. "Our pilot is waiting," he said calmly, "and we have a tea time in the Bahamas this afternoon." He turned to the approaching security staff, who were all too familiar with the Robinson family and their regular flights. The terminal had gone completely silent except for the sound of the woman's increasingly frustrated demands. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how this would play out. The security team was just steps away, and the look on their faces made it clear that someone was about to get a very rude awakening. And it wasn't the Robinson family. The next few moments would become the kind of video that people share with the caption, "Watch until the end," as justice was about to be served in the most satisfying way possible. The security team arrived just as the woman was mid-rant, still waving her phone around and threatening to call the authorities. The lead security officer, a tall man with graying hair and kind eyes, stepped forward with a warm smile, directed at the Robinson family. "Good morning, Dr. Robinson. Heading to the Bahamas today?" he asked cheerfully, completely ignoring the flustered woman. "We just finished the security check on your jet, and everything's ready to go." He'd known the family for years, having watched their kids grow up through countless flights. The woman's jaw dropped so fast you could almost hear it hit the floor. Her phone, which she'd been brandishing like a weapon, slowly lowered as confusion spread across her face. The other security officers were already moving to position themselves between her and the family. But, she stammered, looking back and forth between the security team and the Robinsons. They can't." Her designer bag slipped from her shoulder, dangling awkwardly at her elbow as her perfectly crafted worldview began to crumble. Mrs. Robinson, still recording the interaction, spoke up with the same calm authority she used in courtrooms. "We've been patient with your harassment," she said firmly, "but this needs to stop now. Our children shouldn't have to witness this kind of behavior." Their daughter, who hadn't stopped recording, added quietly, "Mom, this is already going viral. My TikTok is blowing up." Indeed, several people who had been recording the scene were already posting it online, their thumbs flying across their phones as they added hashtags like #PrivateJetKaren and #TheChistostop. The lead security officer turned to the woman, his friendly smile replaced with a professional sternness. "Ma'am, Dr. Robinson is one of our most valued clients. He performs life-saving surgeries at hospitals across the country, and this jet helps him reach patients in critical condition. A young flight attendant stepped forward, adding, "Just last month, Dr. Robinson flew out at 3 a.m. to perform emergency surgery on a child in Atlanta. He saved that little girl's life." She'd been on that flight herself and had never forgotten the dedication she'd witnessed. The woman's face, which had been red with righteous indignation, now turned pale. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the realization dawning across her features. The other travelers in the terminal had formed a loose circle around the scene, many shaking their heads in disapproval at her behavior. Mr. Robinson checked his watch again and addressed the security team. "We appreciate your help, but we really should be going. We have a schedule to keep." Even now, faced with such blatant prejudice, he maintained his professional demeanor. His children stood tall beside him, having learned from their parents how to handle such situations with grace. Their son, unable to resist, pointed to the large window. "Look," he said innocently, "they're loading Dad's surgical equipment onto our jet right now." Sure enough, airport staff were carefully loading specialized medical containers into the cargo hold of the Robinsons' private aircraft. The woman's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. A young businessman nearby picked it up and held it out to her, but not without commenting, "Maybe instead of calling the police, you should call a therapist about those prejudices." Several people in the crowd chuckled, and the woman snatched her phone back, her hands shaking. The security team was now firmly guiding her away from the family, but she kept looking back over her shoulder, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water as she tried to find words to explain away her behavior. The lead security officer turned back to the Robinsons. "Please accept our apologies for this incident. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again." He gestured toward the private jet access door, where an attendant was already waiting to escort them to their aircraft. As the family made their way to their jet, other travelers began applauding. It wasn't just applause for the Robinsons' dignity in the face of prejudice. It was applause for every person who had ever faced similar discrimination and handled it with grace. As the woman was being escorted away by security, her meltdown reached new heights. Her carefully maintained composure completely crumbled, replaced by a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation. The private terminal's peaceful atmosphere was shattered by her increasingly frantic voice. "You don't understand," she practically shouted, her designer bag now completely forgotten and dangling off her arm. "I was just trying to help. I was providing a public service." Every word she spoke just dug her hole deeper, and the phones recording her continued to roll. The security team exchanged knowing looks as they guided her toward the terminal's main office. They'd seen entitled behavior before, but this was something else entirely. The lead officer kept his voice professional but firm. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us to discuss your harassment of our clients." Meanwhile, the Robinson family stood tall, their dignity intact. Other travelers were approaching them now, offering words of support and apologizing for having witnessed such behavior. A young mother with 2 small children came up to Mrs. Robinson, tears in her eyes. "I want you to know," she said softly, "that my kids just saw a master class in how to handle ignorance with grace. Thank you for showing them that." Mrs. Robinson reached out and squeezed her hand, both women sharing an understanding that went beyond words. The woman being escorted away caught sight of this interaction and tried to turn back. "But I'm on the airport's VIP committee," she wailed, her voice hitting a pitch that made everyone wince. "I've never seen them here before. How was I supposed to know?" "That's exactly the problem," called out an elderly gentleman who had been watching the whole scene. "You assumed you had to know them for them to belong here. That's what we call prejudice, young lady." His words carried the weight of years of wisdom, and several people nodded in agreement. Their daughter's phone buzzed continuously with notifications. The video was spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. "Mom," she whispered, "it's already got 100,000 views, and it's only been up for 10 minutes. The woman overheard this, and her face, if possible, went even paler. No, 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 she muttered, finally realizing the full implications of her actions. You can't post that. I'll sue. Her threats fell flat as more people held up their phones, showing her just how many angles of her behavior had been captured. Mr. Robinson turned to his family, speaking just loud enough for others to hear. This is why we always stress the importance of education and breaking down stereotypes. He looked at his children with pride. You both handled this situation perfectly. The airport staff had formed a protective circle around the family, but it wasn't really necessary anymore. The woman's tantrum had devolved into quiet sobbing as she was led away, her perfectly styled hair now disheveled, mascara running down her cheeks. Sir, one of the flight attendants approached Mr. Robinson. Your pilot says everything's ready whenever you want to board. We've already moved your luggage onto the jet. She paused, then added with a smile, and we've added some extra chocolate chip cookies for the kids. They deserve it. The terminal manager appeared, looking professionally concerned. Dr. Robinson, Mrs. Robinson, we sincerely apologize for this incident. Please be assured that appropriate action will be taken. He handed them his business card, adding, though I have a feeling social media is already handling part of the consequences. Indeed, phones throughout the terminal were lighting up with notifications as the video began spreading across platforms. Comments were pouring in by the thousands, many sharing similar experiences, others expressing outrage, but most praising the family's composed response. Their son, ever the optimist, looked up at his parents and said, well, at least our vacation will be peaceful after this. The comment broke the tension, causing everyone nearby to laugh. Even the security team cracked smiles as they disappeared around the corner with the still protesting woman. The scene at the private terminal shifted dramatically as airport staff began revealing just how well they knew the Robinson family. The same woman who had been so certain they didn't belong was about to learn exactly how wrong she'd been. Dr. Robinson called out one of the maintenance crew members, walking over with a proud smile. I never got to thank you properly. The surgery you did on my mother last month. She's walking again. He reached out to shake the doctor's hand, his eyes glistening with gratitude. The woman, still within earshot as security continued to escort her away, visibly flinched at these words. Her previous protests died in her throat as more people stepped forward with their stories. A flight attendant joined in, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. And Mrs. Robinson, that scholarship program you started for underprivileged law students. My niece just got accepted. You're changing lives. She beamed at the family, particularly directing a warm smile at their children. The terminal manager, still standing nearby, couldn't help but add his own commentary. The Robinsons have been flying out of this terminal for 7 years, he announced to the gathering crowd. Dr. Robinson uses this jet to reach emergency cases across the country. He's saved countless lives. Their daughter's phone kept buzzing with notifications. Mom, she whispered, showing her the screen. People are sharing your old interviews about diversity in corporate law. Your speech from last month's conference is going viral too. The woman being escorted away had completely deflated now. Her designer outfit, which she'd worn like armor, seemed to hang limply on her frame as she heard story after story about the family she tried to exclude. Remember when they flew their whole medical team out during that hurricane last year? One security guard mentioned to another. Performed surgeries for 3 days straight in that disaster zone. Their voices carried clearly across the terminal. A young pilot walked past, tipping his hat to the family. Best passengers we could ask for, he said loudly. Always remember everyone's names, ask about our families. Real class acts. He shot a pointed look at the woman, who seemed to shrink even further into herself. Their son, watching all this unfold, tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, remember when you let me give the cookies Mom baked to all the airport staff last Christmas? His clear voice rang out, causing several staff members to smile at the memory. The woman's face had gone through a remarkable transformation. The superior sneer was long gone, replaced by an expression of dawning horror as she realized just how badly she had misjudged the situation. Her perfectly manicured nails now nervously picked at the strap of her designer bag. "We've got your jet ready, Dr. Robinson," called out the head mechanic. "Just finished the monthly safety inspection yesterday. Everything's perfect, as always." He gave a thumbs up, then added, "By the way, my son loved that book Mrs. Robinson recommended about becoming a lawyer." The terminal had become a spontaneous testimony to the family's character and contributions to their community. Every new voice that spoke up seemed to drive another nail into the coffin of the woman's assumptions. Their daughter, still recording, captured it all. "The comments are wild," she said, scrolling through her phone. "Someone recognized Mrs. Robinson from that time. She won that huge civil rights case last summer." They're sharing the news clips. The security team had finally reached the office door with the woman, who looked like she wanted nothing more than to disappear. Her earlier righteous indignation had been replaced by the uncomfortable realization that she had just harassed some of the terminal's most respected and beloved clients. "Your jet's ready whenever you are," the terminal manager said warmly to the Robinsons. "Though I think half our staff wants to share their stories first." He chuckled, gesturing to the growing number of people gathering nearby, each seemingly waiting their turn to speak. The aftermath of the incident spread across social media like wildfire. Within hours, the hashtag PrivateJetKaren was trending nationwide. The Robinson family's quiet Tuesday morning had transformed into something much bigger. A powerful moment that sparked important conversations across the country. Inside the terminal office, the woman sat slumped in a chair, her phone blowing up with notifications as her friends and family members started recognizing her in the viral videos. The airport's security chief was explaining the seriousness of her actions, but she barely heard him over the sound of her social world crumbling. "My husband's law firm," she whispered, staring at her phone in horror. "They're trending too. People are leaving reviews about what I did." Her perfectly polished exterior had completely cracked, revealing the fear underneath as she realized the consequences of her actions would extend far beyond this morning. Meanwhile, the Robinson family's departure had turned into an impromptu celebration of unity. People from all walks of life in the terminal were sharing their own stories of facing prejudice, finding strength in the family's dignified response. A group of young pilots approached the security chief's office with a petition they'd rapidly put together. "We want the airport to require anti-bias training for all VIP committee members," one explained. "This can't happen again." Others quickly added their signatures, including several high-profile frequent flyers who witnessed the incident. The terminal manager was on his phone, dealing with a flood of media requests. "Yes, we're aware of the incident." "No, that behavior doesn't reflect our values." "Yes, we're taking appropriate action." His voice carried through the terminal as reporters nationwide picked up the story. Their daughter's original video had already been shared by several major news networks. Comments poured in by the thousands. "This is how you handle ignorance with class." "Those parents are raising their kids right." "The way they stayed calm. That's real strength." The woman's own daughter, a college student, called her in tears. "Mom, how could you? Dr. Robinson did my friend's emergency surgery last year." The phone conversation was clearly audible through the office door, adding another layer to the woman's very public humbling. Outside, a flight attendant was being interviewed by a local news crew that had rushed to the scene. The Robinsons? They remember every staff member's birthday. "They've helped put 3 of our kids through college with their scholarship program." That's who she tried to kick out. Social media detectives quickly uncovered the woman's identity, revealing her role in several local organizations. Her country club posted a hasty statement distancing themselves from her actions. Her charity board position was already being called into question. Back in the office, she watched through the window as the Robinsons finally headed toward their jet. Airport staff lined up spontaneously, forming an impromptu honor guard. Someone started clapping, and soon the whole terminal joined in. "I didn't know," she kept muttering, mascara streaking down her face. How was I supposed to know? The security chief just shook his head, handing her a tissue, all explaining that her VIP access was permanently revoked. The young businessman who had recorded everything turned out to be a civil rights attorney. He handed his card to the airport management, offering to help review their security policies. "Let's turn this incident into positive change," he suggested, and several staff members nodded enthusiastically. Mrs. Robinson's latest court victory, defending a group of minority business owners, was now being widely shared online. Mr. Robinson's recent medical outreach programs in underserved communities became a trending topic. Their children's academic achievements and community service made headlines. As their private jet prepared for takeoff, the pilot's voice crackled over the radio. "Tower, this is Robinson Medical Flight 2857, requesting clearance. We've got a doctor on board who's probably going to spend his beach vacation answering calls about this morning's excitement." The airport staff couldn't help but smile. They knew this incident would lead to real changes in their protocols and policies. Sometimes it takes an unfortunate moment to spark necessary conversations and create positive transformation. By evening, the morning's incident had become national news. Major networks were running the story with headlines like "Private Jet Prejudice Backfires" and "Airport Karen Meets Her Match." The video had racked up millions of views across all social media platforms, sparking conversations in homes and offices across the country. The Robinson family's private jet had barely touched down in the Bahamas when their phones started buzzing with interview requests. Morning shows, news programs, and even late-night hosts were all eager to hear their story. But true to their character, they declined most requests, preferring to let their actions speak louder than words. Back at the Nashville airport, things had taken an interesting turn. The terminal staff had organized an impromptu meeting to discuss changes in their protocols. "We need to make sure nothing like this happens again," the terminal manager announced to his assembled team. "The Robinsons may have handled it with grace, but not everyone should have to deal with this kind of treatment." The woman's social media accounts had gone dark after a flood of comments, but screenshots of her previous posts were circulating widely. Her history of subtle prejudiced comments and veiled accusations suddenly took on new meaning in light of her airport behavior. "Remember how she always complained about maintaining standards at the country club?" One comment read. "Now we know exactly what she meant by that." The replies were filled with similar stories from people who had encountered her type of behavior before. Their daughter's TikTok following had exploded. Young people were sharing their own experiences with prejudice and discrimination, turning the incident into a teaching moment. The way they handled it was pure class. One viral comment read, "They showed you can stand up for yourself without losing your dignity." The airport's corporate office issued an official statement. "We are implementing mandatory sensitivity training for all staff and VIP members. The events of this morning have shown us that we must do better." They announced a new partnership with civil rights organizations to develop comprehensive anti-bias protocols. Local news crews interviewed regular airport staff members who had known the Robinson family for years. The stories they shared painted a picture of a family that had always treated everyone with respect, from the janitors to the pilots. Dr. Robinson once delayed his own flight to help when one of our security officers had a medical emergency, shared one longtime employee. "Mrs. Robinson has been quietly funding college scholarships for our staff's kids for years. These are the people that woman tried to humiliate." The woman's attempts to explain herself only made things worse. Her hastily posted apology video, filmed in her luxury home, came across as insincere and self-serving. "I'm sorry if anyone was offended," she said, using the classic non-apology that only fueled more criticism. Different organizations began cutting ties with her. The charity board she served on announced her resignation. The country club suspended her membership pending review. Her husband's law firm issued a statement distancing themselves from her actions. Meanwhile, at their beachfront resort, the Robinson children were processing the morning's events with remarkable maturity. Their son was working on a school essay about the experience, while their daughter's thoughtful social media posts about dignity in the face of prejudice were going viral. A popular news anchor summed it up perfectly in his evening broadcast. Today we saw two different types of privilege on display. One was earned through years of hard work, dedication, and helping others. The other was assumed, based on nothing but prejudice. The difference couldn't have been clearer. Support poured in from unexpected places. CEOs, celebrities, and public figures praised the family's composure. But perhaps most touching were the messages from ordinary people who saw themselves in the Robinsons' experience. "Thank you for showing my children how to respond to ignorance with dignity," one mother wrote in a widely shared post. "You've turned an ugly moment into a powerful lesson about grace under pressure." 2 weeks after the incident, the viral moment had transformed into something much more meaningful. The Robinson family, back from their Bahamas vacation, decided to turn this negative experience into positive change that would impact generations to come. At a press conference held at the same private terminal where it all began, Mr. Robinson stood at the podium, his family beside him. The room was packed with journalists, airport staff, and community leaders. His words were simple but powerful. "We're not here to dwell on what happened. We're here to talk about what happens next." Mrs. Robinson then unveiled their new initiative, a $1 million foundation dedicated to creating opportunities in aviation for underprivileged youth. "Every child should be able to look up at the sky and know that their dreams can take flight," she announced, earning a standing ovation from the crowd. Their daughter, whose viral video had now reached over 50 million views, had started a social media campaign called #BelongingInEverySpace. Young people across the country were sharing their own stories of breaking barriers and challenging stereotypes. Her brother had begun speaking at school assemblies about handling discrimination with dignity. The woman from the incident, meanwhile, had gone through her own transformation. After 2 weeks of self-reflection and professional counseling, she reached out through her attorney to make amends. Instead of accepting her private apology, the Robinsons invited her to join their foundation's advisory board. "Real change happens when we turn opponents into allies," Mr. Robinson explained to a surprised media audience. The woman, humbled by their grace, accepted the position and committed to using her connections to open doors she had once tried to keep closed. The airport had undergone major changes too. The terminal manager proudly showed off their new training program, developed with input from civil rights experts. "Every staff member, from janitors to executives, goes through this training," he explained. "What happened that day will never happen again." Local flight schools had partnered with the Robinson Foundation to offer scholarships. "We've already had hundreds of applications," the program director shared excitedly. "Kids who never thought they could have a career in aviation are seeing new possibilities." Their son's essay about the incident won a national writing competition. His simple but profound conclusion resonated with readers everywhere. "Sometimes the people who try to make you feel like you don't belong end up showing everyone exactly why you do." The Woman's Country Club, instead of simply reinstating her membership, took a surprising turn. They invited Mrs. Robinson to help redesign their membership policies, leading to the most diverse class of new members in the club's history. Major airlines took notice. Several reached out to partner with the Robinson Foundation, offering internships and mentorship programs. "We're not just training pilots," Mrs. Robinson explained. "We're training future aviation executives, airline owners, and industry leaders." Their daughter's social media campaign had sparked a movement. Schools and businesses across the country were adopting the #BelongingInEverySpace principles. "It's not just about diversity," she explained in a viral post. "It's about creating environments where everyone can thrive." The private terminal had become a symbol of transformation. They installed a small plaque near the entrance. Everyone who belongs here belongs here. Simple words that carried a powerful message for everyone who passed through. The family's approach to handling the incident became a case study in leadership training programs. Companies reached out to learn how to turn discriminatory incidents into opportunities for growth and change. As Mr. Robinson prepared to board their jet for another emergency surgery flight, he paused to take in the scene at the terminal. The staff was more diverse than ever. Young aviation students toured the facility, eyes wide with possibility. The woman who had once tried to exclude them was now leading a tour group of minority children interested in aviation careers. Sometimes, he said to his family, the worst moments bring out the best opportunities for change. Their private jet took off into the sunset, leaving behind a legacy of transformation that would impact lives for generations to come.